Welcome to ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigrila Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach. In this podcast, I share ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways in which plants can help you lead a naturally conscious life. Hello. We are back for episode 5. Woo! For me, this is super exciting. I'm having so much fun sharing all of this plant wisdom with you. Okay, today we are going to take again from the next, which will be the April Plant Inspired Masterclass. If you're listening to this after April, don't worry, all the Masterclasses replays are available for you inside of the Naturally Conscious community at the blooming level. And so you will be able to catch this no matter what time or when you decide to listen to this episode. But what we're doing here is setting the foundation for what will be the next topic of our monthly plant-inspired masterclass in the Naturally Conscious community. And the next one is a doozy of a topic. I love this title. The title is Creating from Stability and Stabilizing While Creating, a Plant's Model. All right. So the reason for this podcast and why it's so important is to kind of set a foundation. So the foundation for this is really, it's a super interesting topic, right? But what does it actually mean in a nutshell? I mean, creating from stability and stabilizing while creating. And these are the two extremes that we're going to explore. So first and foremost, before I get into the plant model and the way the plants do it, let's talk about what these two terms actually mean. So today we're going to get into this creating from stability and stabilizing while creating. So same words. So let's define that. Creating or creativity or innovation, lots of different words. The idea of I am in movement to mutate or to move into something different. So I'm taking where I currently am and I am expanding on that in order to create something new. Pretty simple concept from that perspective, right? The idea that, I don't know, I have a great idea. I want to actually create this idea. So I sit down and I start to plan for it and I start to innovate and I start to put things together. And I'm in a mode of creation, which can be a bit chaotic, right? Because I'm throwing out ideas. I'm looking at all the different parameters. I'm exploring new concepts. I'm putting together things that I might not have ever thought before. So creation is a very expansive sort of feeling. It's very expansive in the sense of I am moving into a new state. I am mutating or evolving or transforming or transmutating, depending on which term you want to use for what you're working on, into something that didn't exist before. And that is the entire creation mechanism. On the flip side of that, we have stabilization, right? I am in a state where things are chaotic, unbalanced, in constant movement, and I need to stabilize that to create a new point of equilibrium. I need to create balance. I need to move into something that is stable, in which I can continuously perform from a place of stability, because chaos can be really fun, but it can also be extremely draining. So creation, stabilization, two extremely important phases. Now, the reason why this topic came about is because what I see in a lot of my clients, I see this in my students, and when we're looking at the way we create, we tend to think of it a little bit linear, and we tend to think of it from the perspective of I open up and start to create something, right? So that's that chaotic perspective that I mentioned. And then once I create something, I stabilize it and I like define it. I give it a shape. I give it a form. I give it a function. I give it a foundation. And from there, I have this nice stable piece. The problem is that when you only think about things from those two phases, then you run into the perspective of ending up stagnant if you go too far into stabilizing, or in constant motion and exhausted if you create on a constant basis. In other words, un the sort of in motion of both of these, when both of these are applied at 100%, in other words, when you are either 100% in creation mode or 100% in stabilization mode, you end up with these two extremes. And really, when you look at many of the processes, right? Has anybody ever heard of the forming? What is it? Forming, storming, norming, and performing, which is like the different stages of the creation of a group. And so you're in a page where you're forming, and that's the creation perspective. I'm like all kind of moving around, and I'm trying new things, and I'm getting to know each other, and we're exploring and experimenting, and that's the forming stage. Then storming is where I've now thrown all these things together, and now I'm doing this as a group. So the forming, I'm bringing together the different elements that make up that kind of creative process. And then storming is I'm allowing myself the permission to explore this from many different angles. Then I have norming, where I've now created probably something, and now I'm normalizing it. I'm starting to give it a shape. I'm starting to give it that form and that function. And then there's performing, which means this has now been stabilized. It's now a new equilibrium and base point. And from there, I just continuously do this over and over again, and I perform. I get those same good results. It sounds great. The problem is, at the other end of that, you never know when you're supposed to really start over. When is that thing that you're working on become stale? It no longer can carry out the function that it once did. It can no longer actually be what you need it to be, because even though it is stable and performing, the criteria upon which it was created has changed. So a really good example and a simple example of this is I am doing a certain kind of exercise. And so maybe I'm doing crunches for my stomach, or I'm doing a certain kind of specific exercise, and it has works my muscle really well. And now my muscle gets to a point where I stabilize. In other words, after learning how to do this, after experimenting, I found that number one exercise that really works for that part of my body. And I do that exercise on a regular basis. So I'm performing, and my body is changing and modifying. But then at some point, I realized that I'm not going any further. I'm not, my body is no longer reacting the way it used to react in the past. I'm doing the exercise exactly the same way I have always done it. I am doing it with the same consistency. I'm doing it with the same intensity. I'm doing it and all the same. But what happens is my muscle has now adapted to that. And so therefore, I'm not going to get the same result. So what am I supposed to do? I can either add more weight, I can slightly modify. And so I need to then go into a creation mode where I explore and I experiment. And this is what we mean by creating from stability. I have the experience of the form, of the technique, of the movement, and even of the feeling, which is a really important one, of exactly how my muscle reacts to that exercise. But now I need to go one step ahead, and I need to break out of that stability in order to try something new, to push my muscle to react in a new way. So this is the idea of creating from stability. Now, I'm still going to use that same technique from the perspective of I've learned that my body needs to be in this to protect maybe some other muscle or a bone or something like that. I have learned many things, so I don't throw everything away. I still keep that stable form, but I start to test from beyond that stable form. And that is the creation while stabilizing. So and then the opposite side of that is I stabilize while I'm creating. As I start to test out new different positions or weights or repetitions, right? There's multiple variables. I'm constantly looking at what those results are. And when I find a result in the direction of what I want to go to, I start to stabilize that in order for me to narrow down what I'm supposed to do. I don't just throw away the entire exercise and start with something new, right? If I was doing, I don't know, squats, I don't just all of a sudden assume that I'm supposed to run in order to exercise that muscle, or do leg presses in order to exercise that muscle. What I think about is I'm doing my squats in a certain way. These are the muscles that it's working. I have different variables such as the weight, the repetition, and even the slight modification of the body. So now I'm from a place of stability. I can identify the different parameters, and then I can be a little bit chaotic within those parameters in order to try different pieces. So, in a nutshell, when I'm talking about creating from stability and stabilizing while creating, are these two pieces of the fact that I can either let everything, if I'm going pure creation mode, I open up every single parameter and I explore everything and I let caution go to the wind and I do all these types of things. If instead I'm creating from a place of stability, I use the information and the knowledge of what I've created in the past in order to see what are all the different variables that I can change, including some that I might not have thought of. So I do give myself permission to be a little bit creative and even go beyond the norm. But I do that from a place of stability and understanding the baseline that I already have. Conversely, so if I'm stabilizing while I'm creating, it is the process of I have thrown all these things out there, there are all these parameters, and I start to identify which of these parameters can I lock in on and start to stabilize. So, this is the type of part that goes in the middle of your process. The beginning of your process, you're probably going to go really creative and really chaotic. The end of the process, you're going to get really stable so that you can get repetition. In the middle, you have iterations that you can do in order to play around with this stability and this creativity. And in reality, this brings in the ability for you to understand from different points of view: masculine, feminine, expansion, contraction, ecosystem building, ecosystem like growth and movement versus ecosystem instead reduction and conservation, right? There's multiple ways for us to look at. And this is to differentiate between these two because obviously they're very, very similar, right? To create while you're stable and to stabilize while you're creating can be kind of a little bit confusing as to understand. What you have to understand first and foremost is, where are you today? In other words, what is the current state that I'm experiencing more than anything? Am I in a state where I have already identified kind of where I already have a test model, or I have a hypothesis, or I have something that I'm actually working on, and therefore I need to bring that to a stable point in order for me to test whether or not that works? Or am I instead in something that's already moving and that already has a point of stability, and I really want to understand how I need to shake it out? So I know it's subtle. I know we didn't go into too many details today. And the reason for this is because in the next episode, I'm going to go deeper into understanding what are the perceptions and evolutions that we can experience in order to create this stability and play in this realm. Because the value of understanding this, of really getting good at playing around between this masculine and feminine principle, this expansion and contraction, this chaos and equilibrium. The reason why you want to get really good in this area is because this is the place of actually maximum innovation. We tend to think that maximum innovation is when I throw caution to the wind, when I go completely into chaos, when I'm, a little bit out of control and I create. And while that can lead to moments of illumination, of moments of enlightenment, moments of clarity, the truth of the matter is that the most progressive form of innovation happens when you constantly create from stability and stabilize those creations, because that's what's going to give you your motion going forward and enhancement. Because when you do this, you have the opportunity to really understand what the performance or the actions that thing that you've created has taken. You've understood how it works, how it functions, what its results are. And so therefore it's much easier for you to build upon foundations and also remove parts of the foundation. And this is really where we're going to get into even deeper, because it is the removing of foundation, the fact that there are moments when you want to purposely take yourself out of a stable situation in order to create, but you want to do it in a place of feeling safe. So if we switch this from like the development of objects or of programs or of processes, and we switch the lens to the development of the self, to me, my own personal, my question is, stability also can be translated into safety. So the question is, how do I feel safe enough to let go and create? That's the real definition of creating from stability. How do I feel safe enough to completely let go? And how, from the perspective of stabilizing while creating, how can I feel completely free when in reality I have a series of parameters or I have a foundation around me? You see this slight difference between the two, right? I want to be able to feel free enough to be able to create anything I want, but at the same time, freedom, we think of rules as something that takes away my freedom, when in reality, from the state of creating from stability, rules, foundation, parameters, boundaries, all of these instead enhance my ability to create or to evolve myself, to transform, because I have a stable base from which I'm working with. And from that stable base, then I can open myself up more freely. So the interesting part is that freedom is not the absence of rules. The feeling of safety, and safety is not the presence of rules. Safety is feeling free when you have rules, and freedom is having rules that while you feel free, like they're connected all together. Freedom and safety, rules and openness, all of these are two sides of a coin that are constantly flipping between one another. And in the next plant inspired masterclass, we're going to go in depth as to how plants are able to use this game to constantly work between the self and the ecosystem, to stabilize and then to push a transformation, to evolve and yet stay stable, or to stay constant. And we're going to go into this in even more depth so that we can understand how to use these plant models for our own growth. So remember, the second Tuesday of April, again, if you watch this after April, in the Blooming membership of the Naturally Conscious community, you will find all the replays so that you can watch this at any time, no matter when you see it. But if you want to come live the second Tuesday of April, in the Blooming Sprouts of the Naturally Conscious community, you're going to love it, because we're going to get really in depth into this. We're going to have some great conversations, and we're going to see how plants help us understand this model in depth. I'll see you there.